Okay, we are live, Craig.
Okay, let's get far away.
Far away, I will. Okay, so just anyone who doesn't know Craig Kelly and his affiliation with me is that, Craig has been helping me out a lot in the background with advice and things like that. And he's taken everything that we've been doing seriously. And he's been concerned about the relationship between the people and law enforcement for quite a few months now. So he's putting his money where his mouth is, so to speak. And Craig Kelly is actually the chair of the Australian Parliament's Joint Committee on Law Enforcement. Now, Craig, what does that mean to someone who doesn't know what that is?
Okay, cool. Yeah, okay. In Parliament, we have the executive government, which is the cabinet, which is all the ministers. Separate to that, we have a parliamentary committee system, and that there are different committees for different things, and those committees have separate powers. Now, one of my roles in Parliament, I'm actually a chair of what's called the Joint Committee, which means there's members of both the House of Representatives and also the Senate. And there's members from across the political spectrum. So there's Labor Party members and there's Liberal Party members on that committee. So it's a mixed committee. The government on the committee has the majority. So I'm the chair and the government has this. So I think there's 5 Liberals and 4 Labor members on the committee. Now, we actually have a statutory power under legislation that enables us to inquire into certain things. We have oversight of the Australian Federal Police and the Australian Crime Commission. And one of the other powers we have is to look at trends and changes in criminal activities and law enforcement methods. Now, when the COVID issue came up, it was actually the deputy chair, the Labor member for Cowan in Western Australia, Dr. Anne Alley, that actually put this inquiry or suggested this inquiry. And I actually thought it was a good idea, so I was happy to go along with her recommendation. So this is not a Labor and Liberal thing. This is an inquiry that has been jointly agreed to by a Labor Member of Parliament and myself as a Liberal Member of Parliament. And one of the things we're looking into, I think our terms of reference is up on your Facebook page. We're looking at basically what are some of the changes in law enforcement that have occurred resulting in this COVID period. Now, we then actually, the process is that we invite people to make public submissions. So anyone that has any issue or concerns or would like to draw anything to the Federal Parliament's attention about any thoughts they had on anything amongst our terms of reference that we have, makes a public submission. There's a process where they email it through. I think you've got that up on the website as well. From that, the committee actually holds public inquiries. So it's almost like, and we travel around. Sometimes we have them in Canberra. With the COVID restrictions, we haven't been able to travel. We've been doing them by Zoom. But I'd imagine in the new year that we'll be back up and we'll be travelling again. So different inquiries. We've been all around Australia. So we could go to have an inquiry in Victoria. We've often held them in Parliament House there. There's a reciprocal arrangement between the Federal Parliament and the State Parliament that enables us to hold those inquiries in Parliament House.
Great.
And we can get people that made submissions to actually come in and give us oral evidence and we have the opportunity to question them. They get to explain their situation. And from that, the committee gets to make a final report, which is tabled in Parliament. So it all goes on the Hansard record about the recommendations that we then make to the executive government. And the executive government then has an obligation to come back and say what they should do.
Okay, so let's backtrack a little bit because, so I'm a person, let's say I've had absolutely no interaction with the police at all during COVID-19. The only thing I've seen is basically news and, independent media and things like that. Is there a point in making a submission if I just happen to have an opinion about it?
It's open to every single Australian. So anyone in Australia that has any issues or concerns, if it's from their personal experience, fantastic. It could be their opinion. They might want to give the opinion of a citizen. No one's considered as opinion as greater value than anyone else. Like a leading lawyer could give us an opinion, and a mother that stays at home, looks after 2 kids, can also give us an opinion. Every opinion is treated equally, and we want to get as many submissions in as we can. because I have some great concerns about the way we've approached this pandemic from a law enforcement perspective. We can't undo what's done, but we can learn lessons and we can highlight some of the factual issues that occurred. So if there is a similar situation that occurs down the track, that we're not making the same mistakes that we made before.
That's right. Now, for every average Australian citizen who hears the word submission and thinks, "Oh my gosh, I don't know where to start," can you, being the chair and obviously reading some of these submissions, do you have some very practical tips on if I wanted to write a submission?
First thing to do is to read the committee's terms of reference, because your submission needs to be relevant to the terms of reference. Now, I've just got them. I'll see if I can get some of the terms of reference up here. They're fairly broad. Give me 1 second. I'll get them up in a minute on my phone here. They're fairly broad. So as long as you're addressing, to some extent, those terms of reference involving COVID and law enforcement, it's not as though we say your submission is not relevant to it. So it's simply telling your story or giving your opinion. It can be one paragraph. It can be an essay of, an essay of 100 pages if you like. But, often the shorter and more to the point is the better. So it's simply a matter of doing it as, you can do it as a Word document. You can just do it as an email, however you'd like to do. There's no great set guidelines to do it.
Okay, that's great. I really think you'll get a lot of people doing this. So, guys, you can go to Craig Kelly's Facebook page. It's all there. Also, my website, www.reignitedemocracyaustralia.com.au. Now, I put it there, Craig. I hope you don't mind. It emails the inquiry board, but also it saves the story for me as well, because I'm hoping, and I've put that in there, that maybe we'll probably make a history book about these times, so I wanted to capture people's stories as well. So I've got a link there, guys, where you can choose if you don't want me to share your story, then you can just click, please don't share my story. So that's what I've done to capture that data. But
I just make that one point there. You can also ask for your submission to be confidential.
Yes, okay.
That's an important point. So if you make a submission, it actually goes up on the committee's website with the detail of what you've actually said. But if you don't want your personal details to be disclosed, you simply say at the top of it, this is a confidential submission, right? The committee, it doesn't get put in any public way. The committee gets to read it, okay? But there's no, your details are not given out anyone or made anyone public. So that's also an option to do.
Someone did share a submission with me that was really contrary to, I think, what most people would think. And I just wanted to let people know that anyone can do a submission. So it could be anyone from either side of the political spectrum, et cetera, et cetera. So if you see a public submission, it doesn't mean you're in the wrong place if it doesn't necessarily align with your opinion. Just give your own opinion. Don't worry about the other submissions for now, is what I would say. And also, now, you did say just briefly, I'll just say again, that someone can actually do a submission as an organisation, as a professional, or as a stay-at-home mum, as someone overseas. Anyone can do it, really, as long as it's following in the guidelines of the, what do you call it?
That's right. Yeah, already we've had submission from overseas, from a journalist in France that has made a submission to the inquiry. He's concerned about certain issues. That's come in. The Australian Federal Police have actually made a submission to the inquiry. They've talked, one of the issues that they talked about, and we actually had testimony from the Australian Federal Police. And one of the things that shocked me was that they said that child sexual assaults during this period are up over 100% during the lockdown period.
Oh, gosh.
And they said that, they basically said, look, the lockdown, I think his words were fertile ground for pedophiles. I almost fell off my chair when he was saying this. Now, and then I asked one of the other government bureaucrats, I said, well, is this information being fed back in to the decision makers that are actually deciding whether we should make these lockdowns or not? And he sort of like scratched his head and said, oh, look, so I have to take this on notice. So obviously the answer was no. So that's another important thing to do, is that, and that's one criticism that I have. I don't think that when these decisions about lockdowns and border closures and everything else, closing restaurants and everything else, the businesses that has been done, I don't think the pros and cons or the cost benefit analysis have actually been done properly. Now, as I said, the brutality of the lockdown has led to 150% increase in child sexual assaults. Now, was that fact, and I see you wincing, I know, was that piece of information factored in to when they make the decision, well, let's keep the lockdowns going for another fortnight, knowing that is actually going to provide, and not my words, the Australian Federal Police's words, fertile ground for pedophiles to undergo their activity. Now, that's why it's important. I said, we can't undo that mess that's already been done, but we want to make sure that if any situation like this ever happens again in our nation, I'd like one of our recommendations to make sure that a way that all this information is actually channeled in. So we're making the best decisions, whoever is in government, that they make sure they're looking up all the pros and the cons, and there's ways that can actually be fed up to them so they know, look, if I do this, what are the unintended consequences that I haven't thought about that may occur? Because the reality with every government decision that's made, even with the best of intentions, there's unintended consequences that occur. That's a matter of trying to work out in advance what those unintended consequences may be and thinking, is this government policy that I'm putting in, is it actually worth it? Am I going to cause more harm if I'm doing good?
Well, you'd really have to care to begin with and not be a lazy premier. So that would be one thing. And I just want to say about the sexual assaults, those are only the ones that we know about. Now,
Yes.
Actually, 70% of all sexual crimes are reported by teachers or coaches, and kids haven't been. So
Yeah.
imagine what the real statistic is, Craig. But you're going to keep that information and hopefully do something with that at some point.
Yeah.
But that's so basically. I think what you were saying as well is the submission situation. It's bringing out a lot of things that we didn't even know existed, which is really special.
That's right, yeah. So what we'll do, so the submissions are open until the end of January. So the process will be, we'll try and get as much public knowledge as we can out there, try and get as much public submissions that come in. People make the submissions, I said they just email them in there to the Law Enforcement Committee. I think the details are up on my Facebook page. I think you put them up there as well. Or anyone can go to the Federal Parliament of Australia Law Enforcement Committee's webpage and have a look there. You email the submissions in, you can make them public. If you want to make your submission public, you put your details on there, and that goes up on that. Not your address, but just your name goes up there if you're an individual or the organisation that you represent. If you'd like to keep it confidential, so that only the committee hears about it, you write at the top, please make my submission confidential. That then all goes to the committee. The public ones get listed on the website, so all the committee members can read them, and they're also available to members of the public, and they stay there basically for eternity, as long as the Federal Parliament of Australia goes. Then from there we go to the second step, which would be in the new year, is the public hearings.
Yeah, well, that's
and with that
great.
and with that we'd invite, we'd set a schedule for that up, and we'd invite people to come and give evidence before the parliamentary committee. We might give them, depending on a 10, 15, 20 minute, half an hour window where they get to say face to face to myself and the other members of the Federal Parliamentary Committee, all elected members of Parliament, both senators and from the House of Reps, and again, both Labor and Liberal. So this is not a partisan political thing. It's got members of both political parties involved. They get to hear the evidence. The parliamentarians get to ask you what sort of questions about your evidence, and that all actually goes into Hansard. So that's actually then recorded in the Hansard records of Australia for all time. Once that process is finished, the committee then basically sits back and we do our report.
It's a great opportunity, I think, especially Victorians, me being a Victorian, I feel very good that the federal government is stepping in to do something. Whether it achieves something huge or not, it's still creating pressure and all that as well. But it's kind of sad because the problems that we're going through right now isn't real. Like the buck doesn't stop with law enforcement. Unfortunately, the actions of law enforcement are a result from the top. And even if we do create pressure and we get some changes in law enforcement, it doesn't change the fact that the orders were given by someone who was given by someone else. So someone did say, "Oh, you're not really looking at the bigger picture," and I'm like, "Well, look, one thing at a time. We're doing our best. So we will do our best." Now, that I am going to talk about general law enforcement in a second, but I do want to ask one more question about. So the title of the inquiry is, just so everyone knows, COVID-19, criminal activity, and law enforcement. And what do you actually? I know a lot of people are probably sitting there going, "Okay, this is another parliamentary circus. Some people are going to stand up and have some great speeches, and nothing's going to happen, except some parliamentarians are going to get some good publicity for pretending to care or whatever." I'm just being the voice of the people, yeah? So what do you actually think the inquiry could achieve? I know you can't promise anything, but what do you hope?
Okay. Right. We would make certain recommendations, right? Now, those recommendations, I'm talking hypotheticals here because I don't want to prejudge what we're going to do or say. They could be that the federal government says that a certain policing practice, right, is a breach of human rights.
Perfect.
Okay? And the federal government may make a declaration that a certain practice, is illegal across under federal legislation. We've also got, even though there's constitutional issues involved with this, we have to be careful. But if it's a breach of international human rights regulations made by the federal government, that would then flow back to different state police forces. So we can make a recommendation saying a certain practice is a breach of international human rights legislation, and then we could actually get the federal. We would recommend that one of the federal government acknowledges that, and that would then have some, I think, obligation upon the states to consider that when they're making their decisions.
So this could change legislation
We remember we don't have any. Remember constitutional issues here as well. So law enforcement, federal law enforcement, got the Australian Federal Police and the Australian Crime Commission. Otherwise, the law enforcement agencies are governed by the states. So the federal government doesn't have direct jurisdiction over state government policing. However, we do have where we do have constitutional ability, especially when it comes to human rights issues and international treaties that Australians have signed up to for human rights. The Australian federal government can actually have, if the laws are inconsistent between the federal and the states, and the federal government has constitutional grounds, the federal law overrides the state law.
Okay. Either way, what we need to do, and this is kind of between me and you, but not really, but we need to make media attention about this and continue to do interviews during the inquiry process. Just,
Yes.
The Victorian police are getting international news recognition, not for good reasons. Things like that. It's unfortunate because I personally don't want to name and shame the police, by the way, but it seems like maybe the only option because we've tried to reason with them face to face. Now, that brings me to my next point, is we spoke a few months ago about Victorian police and things were nowhere near as bad as they are now. And you said back then, and I'm just going to paraphrase what you said, it really stuck in my mind, is that, Australians have always been really lucky and blessed to have a good relationship between the police and the people. And, that relationship's obviously eroding. But if you have a good relationship with the police, it makes their job easier.
Right.
And also, which is just a rational reason to do that. But secondly, you said maybe they haven't considered the long-term effects of this relationship having been eroded. Now, since then, it's gotten far worse. How would you talk about this relationship between the police and the Victorian people now?
Yeah, look, I don't want to talk about one particular, a state or territory police force in particular. I'm just talking in general. But you are right. It's been a great thing about our Australian nation that generally there's been a good relationship between the police force and the citizens. There's always been examples of where that's broken down, but generally, I know, and I speak from my personal experience growing up. If you're in the wrong and you're the police officer, you might get a kick up the backside. Talking literally there sort of thing, but generally. If you saw a police officer walking down the street, you sort of said, you acknowledged them, you nodded them, you gave them a smile, right? And you felt safer because the police officer knew that you were on your side and you were supporting them. And if a villain went past, you're going to help the police officer.
Mm-hmm.
And the same thing is if a villain comes after you, the police officer is there to protect you. The police are not there for some political purposes or and try and get, as in other countries we see that take backhanders and bribes to actually enforce the law. Our country's been absolutely blessed with that relationship. And what I've seen on TV, recently, is a real breakdown of that relationship, and that's going to have really long-term consequences. And in fact, I was talking to a couple of really senior retired police officers about a fortnight ago, and they said this is something they have grave concerns about because they knew throughout their career they've often relied upon the support of the public. But if that breaks down, if the public doesn't have trust and confidence in the police are actually going to treat me fairly and squarely, and if I'm doing wrong, okay, I'll cop it. If I'm, often the times that I've got the odd speeding ticket, you grumble under your breath, but then you sort of realise, well, they were probably right. I probably was going a bit fast at the time. They were just they're actually doing the right thing, right? Because it slows everyone down and keeps everyone down within a sensible speed limit. So, but if they're enforcing a law that actually the public doesn't have the public support, or this is something we really have to consider in the long term what the detrimental consequences will be. And this is also something I think our inquiry will look at. Is that again, this is a decision that needs to be considered by all politicians, both at state and federal level, when we are introducing a law that will require some type of policing, whether it's the Australian Federal Police or the Australian Crime Commission, or AUSTRAC, that have certain responsibilities, or at the state level. How are police going to go about enforcing that law? What enforcement processes will they do? And is that law, can they actually enforce the law in a sensible manner that won't turn the public off, have these long-term detrimental effects of the breakdown of relations between the police and the citizens? And I think that's a very important issue, and I don't think enough thought has been given to that over recent months.
I agree. I think a lot of police men and women actually, things are changing so quickly that they actually don't know what they're supposed to be doing exactly. I've had obviously many interactions with police, and a lot of the times I inform them of something and they're like, oh yeah. And then one day they're giving out fines, even if you have an exemption for a mask, and then the next day they're not. And I do have sympathy for them in some ways. I don't think they've got enough breakfast meetings to actually explain all the changes that happen every day. Obviously, I'm talking about Victoria, but so I think this inquiry is very good. I think we've got till January, which is great, and I think we need to keep in touch about it, and maybe we can highlight some submissions that aren't. Are you allowed to talk about submissions before January?
Absolutely. Because what happens? So if you put a submission in today, if you just say someone can do it, there's nothing to stop anyone from putting in a submission today.
Of course not. That's why we're doing this.
That then goes to the Secretariat. The Secretariat then basically looks at it and checks firstly it's not, it doesn't have any defamatory accusations in it. So you can't say that, Jill Smith is a criminal or something like that. So you can't make it defamatory against a particular individual, but that doesn't say a particular group did me wrong. That would basically go to the committee secretary. The committee secretary reads it. The committee secretary thinks that this is one, it's not defamatory. Two, it's within the terms of reference. It gets posted on the committee's website amongst the submissions and would be up next week.
Wow. Okay, this is great. Now, you have said a few things about this, but I just want to ask. I mean, you're the chair of the committee, obviously, but on a personal level, how much do you care about this inquiry? Like on a personal level, personal for you?
I think one of the greatest concerns I have about the future of our country is the suppression of freedom of speech. I really think that that's you've got to make sure that you've got people giving alternative opinions, alternative views. Because remember, every single progress that we've made, everything throughout history, from the time that we climbed out, people left the caves, sort of thing. Every single thing that was done, every single thing that we made an improvement on, is because someone said, "Well, hang on a minute. I think there's a better way of doing what we're doing, or the way we're doing it is not right. I can do something better." And that was always the minority view, always. And then it came around because then it became accepted and tried. So you've got to allow free speech. You've got to allow people to express their opinions, because if their opinion is wrong, the best way to defeat that opinion is not to allow it sort of to censor it and to fester it underground. Bring it out into the open and let it be exposed to other ideas. Let it be debated, and that's how we've done it. Through periods on and off through history. That's how we've ended up with the wonderful society and all the benefits that we have today. So we've got, and I really fear that there's a great concern that I have, even reading the papers today, that people it's a different opinion, it should be silenced, or you don't agree with the experts, as though there's this bureaucratic class of experts that are so wise and so knowledgeable that no one is allowed to question their decisions. And that's one of the greatest fears that I have. So that's one reason it's important.
Great.
Also, the other thing too, often we sort of talk about human rights and things, and they go a bit over the top sometimes of people. What are we arguing for? The right to protest is a right in our country that's got to be protected. I remember when the Black Lives Matter people were protesting. It was, stop them. I said, I was one that said, no. I said, let them protest. They've got to be, as long as you're not sort of like, dangerously blocking the streets and preventing people from access to the hospitals or trying to prevent someone else from going about their work. Okay? If you're just protesting using your voice and you're not actually, interfering with the rights of others, you've got to be able to have that right to protest. Irrespective of what side of politics or what your views are. And remember, that's we had Remembrance Day the other day. That's why those guys fought. That's why when you look down at the War Memorial, when you go in Parliament, Federal Parliament House, the War Memorial is lined up directly with the Federal Parliament. So where the Prime Minister's basically, from the Prime Minister's office doors, there's a straight line. If you open all the doors up, you would look straight down through the middle of Parliament House, over the top of Old Parliament House, down Anzac Parade, straight to the War Memorial, in a direct line. And the reason that it's done like that, the architects did that especially to remind everyone that sits in that Federal Parliament House that we're there the rights and liberties that we have today have been achieved because there's over 100,000 Australians that have sacrificed their lives to give that to us in war. And that's what we've got to remember before we, at the click of a switch, say, it's politically convenient for us to, for a short period of time to suspend people's human rights and rights to protest. That's another reason why I think this inquiry is important.
Well, here in Victoria, we 100% agree with that because obviously you've seen I don't need to go into that because all the viewers know what's going on in Victoria. But look, thanks for all the information, Craig, and I'll keep in touch with you and everyone on my Facebook page, Reignite Democracy Australia. There is, you can fill in the form. There's all the information there. You can go to Craig Kelly's Facebook, which is Craig Kelly MP. No, it's actually just Craig Kelly. I take that back. And that's it. Is there anything else you want to say, Craig, before you go?
Just those terms of reference, I think, is important because there's some fairly broad terms of reference in the inquiry. And it also, I think, the last one is any other matters. So it's basically COVID law enforcement, and as we like to sort of tack on the end, there's some specific issues. So we're also looking at transnational crime. It's not just it's not just law enforcement issues particular. It's looking at transnational crime, as you said, things like what's happening with the issue we saw, the increase in child abuse. Okay. There's I think A, B, C, D, E, F, G. Different things are involved, and also H, any other related matters. So it's a fairly broad.
Wow. Okay, I didn't actually really think about that before this interview. So, what about like suicide? What about addiction, gang
So
violence, all
someone,
that?
let's just say someone had an example that um, the law enforcement response to COVID, right, or during the COVID period, they engaged in. They found that they were taking more drugs, or they found that they were using one particular drug rather than another drug. Right? It may very well be because of the lack of international. So one thing the inquiry would look at, because no one's travelling internationally, what effect is that having on the importation of illicit drugs into the country? Is that having any effect? So are people that were using one illegal substance now using another illegal substance? That could be something. Or it could be something that, the demand for illicit drugs has increased greatly because people have been so depressed during the lockdown because of COVID. That would be something. That would be something that someone could put a submission into the inquiry.
And what about, like, I've heard some people say things were happening in their house, for example, and they called the police and they took a long time to arrive. That would be something too? Or?
Yeah, absolutely, yes. Yeah.
Okay.
Anything to do with, the terms of it's COVID, criminal activity, and law enforcement.
Okay, it's pretty broad, yeah.
So it's pretty broad. Like, I'll just read one particular, this is paragraph D. It says, the nature and effectiveness of responses by law enforcement to trends and changes in criminal activity related to the pandemic, including any changes in the practices, methods, and procedures of law enforcement.
Okay.
No?
Yeah.
So it's also another paragraph. The nature and operations of transnational, serious, and organised crime, including the impact of border control and other policy responses to the pandemic that have impacted supply chains. So there you're talking about illicit drugs and the movement of goods or people, can be people smuggling, and the tactics adopted by criminal organisations to adjust or to exploit changes in their operating environment during the pandemic. So that could go into issues of the increase in child abuse that we've had. So
are you ready for 20,000 emails?
Look, the more submissions, the better.
Yeah.
That's one thing. One thing in this job is that I remember you do a lot of reading, and you learn to read. You learn to get through stuff quickly, and that's also why people make a submission. Often try and make it to the point. Sometimes most things in life often are less is more.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. Well, actually, I think there should be some sort of
better. Less is sometimes better.
I think we should make
not all the time. Not all the time.
No, it really depends on what you're talking about. But I think we should make some sort of like little tip guide too, to just like tell people short and sweet and blah blah. Anyway, I might work on that. But anyway, I think we've covered it pretty well, Craig. What do you reckon? We should get on to our
that's good. Yeah, look,
weekend.
These public inquiries are a very important part of our democracy.
Mm-hmm.
I said the parliamentary committee system that we have in federal parliament is also a very important part of our democracy. And it's something I think that's important with the Joint Committee on Law Enforcement. It is separate to the executive of government. And so there are a few committees that can only do something if the executive government, that's basically the cabinet and the ministers, instruct them to look at. This law enforcement committee has legislative powers to do things outside the executive government. So it's not as though I've got to go to the Prime Minister or to Mr. Dutton in charge of Border Force or any of the other ministers and say, look, hey guys, please tick off on this. It's something that we do separately, and again, it's important. It's bipartisan. Mm-hmm. So I said the actual it was Dr. Anne Alley, who's a Labor member of Parliament from Western Australia, that actually proposed this inquiry and came up with most of these terms of references. And I thought, look, this is a pretty good idea. Let's work together on this.
Yeah. Well, thanks for all of that, Craig, and we'll definitely keep in touch along the way. Okay.
Okay. Thanks, Monica.
Have a good weekend.
Have a great weekend with what's left of it.
Yeah.